as much as you want academics to work, you need school sports to work, because without school sports, kids are academic machines. But in being academic machines, they do not have an outlet to release all the testosterone or the progesterone and all of that, you see. And that's why now we've seen an increase in social ills, kids drinking young. Sports creates a family.
Yeah.
Because if you know that you've got as teammates, if you know that you've got a talented but wayward individual, and you know their background, you know their problems, you'll always find someone who'll be in a position to help and to make this person better, because you can see where their ceiling is. Your ceiling and their ceiling are two different places.
Sure.
And all they just need is the right person in the right place and seeing the right things in his ear.
It's the Curport. Welcome back. It is Gcobani Bobo with Keeping It Rugby. Well, today, the only person who has made it twice into the show. Second episode with him. It is the one and only, the forever giving and generous with his insight as the author of Twice the Glory, inside story of the historic Springbok double World Cup back to back, and is the man who is a commentator at SABC, senior writer for Sports 24. So if you don't know by now, it is him, KT, Khanyiso Tshwaku, is joining me, and we're talking our favorite subject, schoolboy rugby, schoolboy festivals. KT, otherwise you well, brother?
I'm good. All is well, and I hope all is well your side.
You keep busy.
Look, I'm tired, eh? I mean, as we're walking in here, you're asking for how much schoolboy rugby have I watch. I'm like, the past 3 weeks has been quite a lot. But look, I mean, there's always the deluge of rugby kids, the excitement of kids starting their rugby early March. I mean, one of the things I remember, one of my friends actually said that their school now has allowed kids to take up rugby preseason.
What?
As a summer sport. So that'll tell you about the importance of rugby programs at school and how they are the key selling points. I mean, I remember in one of the raps that I put together with the results, there was one of the readers complained that I left out particular schools and had to explain that, look, for this particular segment, we have to have this many schools. And also, then one asked about Port Natal, what's happened to them. And I explained, look, they're no longer on the radar where they used to be. But I actually reminded them that my school played them. In 2006, they came around for a tour in East London, and one of the schools we played. So, look, I mean, when March comes around, and if you look at the length of the school rugby season, I know that there are schools, I think Westford is one of them, the Michael House, Kersney, and if I'm not mistaken, Hilton. They stopped their rugby program at the end of the second term. But the bulk of the rugby schools, I think St. Stithians are the same. I think St. Albans are the same. But I think the bulk of the rugby schools start their off-season training. They started in September. I think October, because I mean some kids will still be playing their summer sports. Some will be needing to be recovering. Some will still play seven. There's still a 7th season after the 15th season. So, but I think not all the schools are as invested in sevens. There are still some who are invested in sevens. So look, I mean, schoolboy rugby now, if we are being honest, it's a year-long program. Kids are doing preseason, and I mean there are schools that try bring in their prospective grade 8s for rugby clinics and see how they can sort out the grain from the chaff. They know that by the time that the year rolls round, they've got their group of rugby players, and then they try to balance their summer sport programs with the winter sport programs, where kids will be playing cricket, rowing, water polo, swimming, but still also attending to the significant matter of rugby, because even though hockey still remains a popular sport, the biggest selling point from these schools' point is rugby.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because it's a massive influence, right? We see these festivals, which has become, I mean, it's of our pastime. And we based in Johannesburg, and you think about what happens over the Easter. The Easter has really become all about that, because for us it's a social thing as old boys, people who are just rugby enthusiasts, we enjoy that. The festivals, the importance of it in the school calendar.
Look, I think the Easter festivals, especially post COVID, they fighting not a losing battle per se, but they're having a slight battle with relevance because I think now with the amount of rugby that the kids are playing and also the impermanent nature of the Easter weekend
Yeah.
across the years. I mean, in some years it's at the end of March,
Sure.
which then creates a bit of a problem because then where do you play school holidays?
Yeah.
And then you've got festivals like your Noordzee, which ended just recently in Stellenbosch.
Yeah.
It's generally an end of first term tournament leading into the holidays. Then now, if you've got Easter weekend coming up, end of March, that gives the players not a high turnaround. If you remember that season, there was that season when the Purpose high player Chris Jordan got injured at Noordzee. And then they still needed to go turn up at Kes for the Kes Easter Rugby Festival. They still showed up, but I think now what has become very important is that the management of the number of games that the kids are playing. I did speak to one of the senior strength and conditioning coaches in the game, and they said that the amount of rugby that the kids play vis-a-vis that the time that's available is absolutely ridiculous because the amount of rugby they play in a space of 2.5 months is close to what professionals play in a season, and they get through it. Remember, they got March, April, May, and a bit of June for those who still play during exams. And then you've got those who still have to go to Craven week. I mean, one of the biggest victims of the early season festivals and the Easter festivals and the need to prepare for Craven New Good is Cape Schools. I mean, if you remember Cape Schools, when it took place, it was always on that first week of the school holidays.
And then there's a Craven week after
that. And I think the last edition of Cape Schools was in 2017. It's a tournament that's now fallen away because its imperatives when it's hosted vis-a-vis what's needed now for Craven Week. Because if you're going to bring in, for example, your Cape schools, that would be your 4 southern suburb schools, your three Paul schools, and your 3 Paul schools. Paul was one part of that. That's 7 schools already. Then you've also got, and they form the spine of the Western Province Craven Week side. And then you've got your Eastern Cape schools, the 3 colleges. You've got Grey. And then every so often, Graham, Mere College, you aren't the force that they used to be 30, 35 years ago.
Yeah.
So now you look at the rugby calendar. I mean, I think a lot of the schools now are 5-6 games down. And generally, I think in your area, you'd be 5-6 games down by the time reunion comes around. And that would be in early May.
Yeah.
Because you'd go to one tour. And then after that, your season starts proper with either a trip to Selborne or a trip to Queenstown. So look, the amount of rugby, I mean, under 14s go to festivals, and the 15s go to festivals, and the 16s go to festivals. I mean, the Tony de Munich festival and the 16 festival at JP's underway. There's the France, but there's also the Jean de Villiers tournament at Paul Gym. Yes, there's the France Malherbe one that's taking place at Paul Boys. Then you've got the Kwacha Festival that's for under 14s that's taking place at Otenikwa. You've also got the Francois Swart Festival, that under 50 festival that takes place at Afis. So from an early age, even you've also got your under 13 festivals. You've got the Marlow one, Noordzee, there's an under 13 festival. So already kids are already putting themselves into the meat grinding machine of festival rugby. I think Grey hosts a super series that's been going on for years. That's under 11 and under 13. So there's already a meat grinder of rugby that's taking place. So by the time the second term starts, you'd find that some schools would have the last session of trials for all your lower teams, and the very next week you go to derbies. Now, by the time you start that second weekend, that first weekend of the second term, teams already 6-7 games down.
Wow. I mean, we look at the professionals and we talk about player welfare.
Yeah.
I mean, this what's happening at the kids now. It's become a meat market.
It is. Whichever way you look at it, which is why the Easter festivals are probably in the firing line, is that they still have the longer shelf life. I mean, we grew up on the St. Stithians, the Kes, and the St. John's festivals. Then Kes needs a bit of a later one coming around 2008. But you realize that in the older era, by the time Easter festivals came round, you were 3-4 games in. And then that would probably now be an opportunity for the wider squad to get game time, because you knew after that Easter festival, that's when all your serious derbies kick in. Now schools are needing to find time to play those festival games. I mean, I know that Grey College, for example, haven't done Easter Festival rugby since 2015. And what happened at Curzon, I remember they were at Curzon at the time, they had a lot of players who got injured. I think 2016, if I'm not, between 2015 and
They're
2016.
ravaged by injuries.
Yes,
right?
they were ravaged by injuries. They were ravaged by injuries. And I think ever since then, they've always preferred, I think they used to go to Union. They go to Union High. And then after that, I think with the growth of North Said, they'd rather get North Said out of the way and then rest the players with training and other things through the Easter festivals, because also they're a school that puts in the most mileage from a traveling perspective. I mean, they've already been to they need to go to George, for example, to play Oteniqua. They then at some point have to trek to Paul to play Paul Boys. At least the only benefit, they still have to go to PE late in the season,
and it's
to play
numbers.
Grey. Yep. Last year they went to Riversdale. They went to Paul. They went to Stellenbosch. They had to go to Pretoria. So they put in numbers, and they're not the only school that does so. So look, I mean, there's also Volderklaver, for example, and yes, I mean, Volderklaver is it's probably a marquee tournament.
Because it is about the top 20. It's about seeding, right?
Exactly. And I mean, the schools, that you get is a set of schools that go there. But remember now, most times they take the under 16s, under 15s, and under 14s. So there's also some schools that don't often play against each other who use the tournament. They use North Said, for example, to bring in their junior sides. And I mean, I remember even before the Paul Grey College derby became cemented last year, they used Volderklaver as a staging point for all the other team games. So you can imagine, one, the amount of mileage, and two, the amount of money that is put in, because I think that traveling is not cheap. I mean, Grey on the 12th of March, I went to the Monash game. Actually, it was over the long weekend. Yes, they were at Monash. They played Monash. They bought the bulk of the teams. Other teams played Rugby Grand. They played Krugersdorp High. So they travel. Great travel for the rugby, and they're not the only school that does so. Paul Roos, every 2 years go to PE. Weinberg every 2 years go to PE. So there's I mean, Paul and Affies, they fly Pretoria, Paul every other year. So.
And then you got even the college, Maritzburg College, coming up to Pretoria Boys, or even
they
to
got kids,
and kids.
They pass up. So you can imagine how much money is spent just getting kids there. Remember, there's parents also need to subsidize, the school subsidize those trips as far as they can, but parents need to put money in. So you just put aside the Easter festivals, which are set in place. They're just for first teams only. The school rugby project is a huge expense for schools, but it's also a prestige event, because it's a prestige thing, because if you've got a very functional school rugby program, it filters into the other sports, and then it also becomes a selling point for the school.
Yeah, I mean, it is a marketing tool. I mean, success breeds success.
Yeah.
If you see the team sort of bring up these results, you want to be part of that, right? You get so involved, and you're like, you know what, this is the opportunity. This looks like a good program that could go for the kids. But, I mean, we know that they've got loads in their hands, but there are some promising players. What has impressed you? Who are the guys that we are actually not really seeing? Or ones that we didn't expect, now they're really coming to the fore?
Look, it's still a bit early to put
any markers on.
Yes, you do get your usual suspects from last season, like Gray's Ethan Adams. I think the only challenge with them is what's his ceiling as a CRA player, because as much as he's got all the skill sets, I think his height as a functional backline player, you need to be minimum 175, 18 going up. And I think he's actually not too much taller than I am. Having seen him I think I did see him at North, not even at North Said, at Monash, because I went to watch a friend's kid play there. Also, remember, with a lot of these festivals, you're getting a lot of rolling subs.
Oh, okay.
So with the rolling subs, they are also making sure that the players are getting as much game time as possible. I mean, I did go to the K's JP game, which was a proper club bang of a fixture. It's a very
Yeah.
good game that JP were deserved winners. Probably once the full derby swing starts, when coaches have now settled on their teams, that's when we'll start to see probably now the cream rising to the top. Unfortunately, I haven't been in a position to watch the trials, for example. I don't think those ones are televised. But we'll probably from the next week onwards start the second weekend of April. That's probably get a fair spread when the teams are playing derby rugby. There's a settling of because I mean by now combinations have settled coaches. Even though they'll try chase unbeaten records wherever possible,
Sure.
they'll probably get to a point where this is my best 23. That's from the first team and the best reserves that he needs from the seconds.
Oh wow! I mean, let's look into the festivals now that we're talking about the Easter festivals. Fixtures. I know there's a Rondebosch Kez, which is a Saturday afternoon. I mean, those sort of bangers that we can look forward to in all these festivals. The ones you're looking forward to, the ones that you're saying to yourself, like if I'm trying to make sure that I can get the best out of it, and I'm based here in Johannesburg, where do I go?
Probably you're looking at Kez and St. John's. They generally have a decent enough mixture of evenly matched schools. You look at Selborne in particular, they've got Affis on the Monday, on Easter Monday at Kez. That's going to be a really tricky fixture for them. I mean, they didn't do very well at the Grey Fest. They lost 45-12 to Westville. They lost 35-5 to DHS. And those are reverses that Selborne generally get from Grey. And that's on a year when they're actually competing reasonably well against Grey. So for them to lose by those margins speaks to, I think, deeper lying problems within their rugby system. I think what the Kez Fest has done, I think they don't have Dale this year, which is a big shame. Considering that Dale does bring a big old boy because of the King Williamstown Islamic diaspora that's here. I think Selborne moving from Kez into Kez has also allowed a lot of the old boys who are based here to actually support the team. I mean, Queens are a fixture here. Queens probably are the most well supported team. It's just that it just becomes a challenge that they always have to play that 8 a.m. game on the Monday because they need to drive back to Queenstown.
Yeah.
And that means they need to leave early after that. So they generally get a prime time game on the Saturday, which works for their supporters. I think the Eastern Cape teams in particular, even the ones that go to St. Stithians, they're a proper pull because, I mean, South Africa's migratory employment patterns means that a lot of Eastern Cape people are based in Joburg. They've moved here for quite some time, but they still maintain strong ties with their school. So, whenever there's a very strong Eastern Cape team, I think you'd find that they will be followed around. So I think Dale will be massively missed, but I think also the fact that they also move around tournaments, they need to satisfy the old boy contingent that's in case, even though it's not in as big a numbers as compared to what they get here. Because I mean, if you get Dale and Queens here and they play successive games, already it becomes a draw card because those who may not have gone to those schools, I mean, the Eastern Cape are there because also it becomes a tie of supporting the Eastern Cape games. I mean, they got it. I mean, the Kez organizers got it on the tee last year when they had Selborne, Dale, and Queens. And they played successive matches. For them, I mean,
it was easy.
It was, and the crowds got involved. Because it also, and I think for a lot of the Eastern Cape people, it felt like the derby days that they generally watched growing up, which now they're brought to they're brought to their front seat. But again, look, I mean, schools do have the option of moving around, and I think I think it becomes important that the schools, especially the ones who come here, rotate. I wouldn't be impartial to schools taking part in different tournaments. If you have a game at St. John's, you actually also then have a game at Kez. Especially with the proximity of those schools. You see, especially when you realize that maybe now you've got two very evenly matched schools, and that's probably the one time you want them to play. I think the absence of the Cape African schools matters. I mean, I remember Paul, the Khamis, Boys High, and
Paul
Paul Roos were they made St. John's that they made that St. John's
No,
tournament.
they used to make it hum.
Yes, they used to make it happen. I mean, and remember, one of the key things with Paul Boys, if 1 year they're kids, they'll alternate between those tournaments. But again, it again goes down to the to the demands of the rugby that they're playing. That if you're going to be playing in North Side and you're going to play, and in the Western Cape where they play generally Western Province where they play Test match rugby every weekend, something's got to give. And I think in their case, the Easter festivals have been the giving case for them.
Oh wow, it's becoming more interesting because I mean, I try to sort of keep up. I mean, what have you seen in terms of the new common trends that is happening at Schoolboy, especially when it comes to coaching philosophy or even the style of plays?
Look, the style of plays will always vary because I think my biggest gripe with Schoolboy Rugby is that there is so much insistence on systems. That players get coached system, and then I think every so often you're seeing these players now outside of the school program are struggling because they now need to have the basics coached drilled into them day in day out, which is why your micro schools, not your macro schools, your micro and your macro schools, like the ones that just fall below the tier, have probably become the most important catchment base. Because those are the schools that allow players to play in every position where a coach will look at a particular player and say, this is my best player. Therefore, that player now needs to be able to rotate and play in almost every position. And you find that if a young player is identified at a particular school, I use a Nico Malan, for example, where you get a Dominic Malchus who's playing for SN 20. When you look at a player like him, you realize when you look at the kind of skill sets he has, you realize that he's pretty much played every position in the back line where he's got skill sets to play. He's played scrum half, he's played fly half, he's played in midfield, he's played fullback, would have had a game or two on the wing. Where you can see that this player has been in a position to enhance the entire skills. And that probably becomes the most important part with the recruitment aspect, where a lot of the schools will put the checkbook and try get play. Yes, but the key thing is that you aren't going to be able to buy all the players, and for all the players that move from your macro school from your micro schools to your macro schools, you are going to have another layer of players coming up. But what is being done to grow players in the system below? And I think that's where now, I mean, the Eastern Cape probably is now at the short end of the wedge. When it comes to these particular systems, where you realize that when you look at a lot of these Eastern Cape schools, Dales, the primary schools in particular, they've become a breeding ground for the KZN schools. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's a parent's prerogative to move a child from grade 7 to one school to grade 8 to one school with the view of bettering a child's future. Because also, if you're going to move from a George Randall, for example, to a Hilton, your prospects in life are going to become better. Because most probably you'll be in it will be a culture shock. Right? It will be a culture shock. Because you will be coming from a middle class, working class school. Now you're walking into a school where every so often you have kids whose parents are captains and champions of industry. Some are from legacy money. So, and a lot of the things that difficult.
When you see a chopper landing, it's just like, what the hell?
And they're exposed to a totally different lifestyle, totally different vices, where things that come difficult for you because of a background are literally things that they don't even need to worry about based on their privilege. So a lot of those factors do affect how kids exist in those environments. Look, the educational factor is the most important part. The kid needs to go to a school to get an education and probably use rugby as a staging point to better their lives. And unfortunately now, the Eastern Cape, schools aside, the Eastern Cape, from an economic perspective, from an employment perspective, from a professional rugby perspective, despite a border rugby union slowly starting to find its feet, even though the numbers aren't saying so on the field. I mean, they did cop 101 SA Cup game. EP also aren't doing quite well. The two Varsity Shield teams in the border, Walter Sisulu and Forte just managed to survive relegation.
Mm.
Madivas, fortunately for themselves, they've played themselves into a position where they've got a promotion relegation game against UJ. They've also made the semifinals. So if you look at the professional layout for the Eastern Cape, if you're a kid who wants to make rugby work, the Eastern Cape is not a place for you. But you also start to ask yourself a question: where do I give myself a quick leg up? Do I stay here? You still got decent enough rugby schools that have
Yeah.
a very, very good profile, or do you go to an environment that will propel you, but also be competitive enough to, by the time that you get to with age a semi to your provincial age group level under 19 under 21, you already understand the lay of the land. You already understand what is demanded of you as an athlete, because by the time by the time you're on a bursary at school, yes,
Well versed, yeah.
yes, you are there on. You also need your academics to match up, so that you
Sure.
still need to pass. But you're also a high performance student because you are here because of a particular skill set that you bring.
Yeah.
And it does, in some way, channel kids towards professional rugby. But I think also how it's balanced vis-a-vis the academics and also preparing a kid for life outside of school. Because I think the key part, and I think the most important thing that I'm not sure if agents share it widely enough with 16, 17, 18-year-olds, that only 1% or 1 to 3% of the kids who make Craven, who make it to schools, become Springboks. How do you now use rugby to
As a
get to
different
where you need
conduit,
to
right?
be? Yes. How do you now use rugby to, if you, let's say you want to become a doctor, you know that you're good enough to play rugby at a reasonable level, but you know that you don't have the wherewithal and the ability to make it as a professional. But you do know that if you play rugby long enough in varsity, you get your bursary, you are able to get your
Doctorate.
you get your qualification, and then still be in a position to contribute to rugby.
Yeah, that is actually a very good point. And talking to the micro schools, there we spoke a lot about the private schools, the festivals that's happening. Is there other festivals that's happening for the rural areas?
That's where the bigger challenge lies. Utata Mzwandile Mali did have a
Yes.
tournament in PE. There is the one that takes place Kwamoko.
Yeah.
On your way to, well, it's our neck of the woods anyway.
Yeah.
On the R63. Yeah. It's on our neck of the woods, R63. On your way to Bedford, Adelaide. For those of you who've been to, who've gone to Craddock from East London, you know,
Sure.
it's R63. You get to N10, then you take the Dagga neck, then you get to, yeah. So you've got that. So you get those that festival. I remember that the Soweto Fest, there were Zola and Kokoma used to have the Soweto Rugby Festival
Zola.
that introduced to me the Eye of the Tiger
Sure.
project, which is still going strong. And again, I did actually attend one of the training sessions. I forgot where they trained, but I actually went and watched them last month. So they for a lot of black schools, they're not there. And this is where the challenge now lies, because the challenge with a lot of black schools, even those that were playing rugby back in the day, is that there is such a need to focus on matric results. School sports for them,
Extramural sort of almost.
extramurals are not something that they focused on. And it becomes a challenge because as much as you want kids to have a fighting chance through academics,
Yeah.
not every kid is book smart.
True.
But there are kids who are athletes who, given the opportunity, will be able to at least use their abilities to just get somewhere in life.
Sure.
So I know that Tanzania or Chris Ngoloyo, Xanti Msaul have been getting tournaments. I mean, they've got a project running in Tanzania Hurricanes.
Okay.
Barry Sharnick has Mzansi Rugby's Academy, which he runs with his fiance Alex Floyd Douglas, that they're running in Port Alfred. And in running it there, they've actually took part in the Graham College Festival and actually beat PA Ulifir. So you do have these. I mean, they used to do the Vusa Academy in Cape Town, the Connect Academy in Cape Town that was doing wonders. And if you look at how a school like Sachs has benefited from that particular program, so Murray Ingram was at the head of that. So there are outlets where kids are moved from schools and participate in what you'd call hub hub programs. I mean,
Yeah.
the Hurricanes, for example, have regular derby dates against the smaller schools, so like not just smaller schools, but they play against your Hudson AOP teams.
Sure.
But what you really need is for isikolo, like your schools like Imzomhle, Khulani, David Mama, Wongalethu, Ntsokotha, all these St. John's, Mthatha, Khanyiso. You need these center of excellence. You need these black schools because they've got the numbers. I mean, I remember growing up to like a Transkei International, and they actually had a very good sporting program at the time. You wonder what happened to them now. So you really need the black schools to understand that school is not just about
Getting
kids
tricks.
being in a academic meat factory from 7 a.m. to 4 a.m. It's unsustainable. It is. I think also no
And it gives a bit of balance too,
is something that is doing well. I forgot to mention him. You'll know him from his work with the Bobo Craven sides.
No, he was our coach. I said our coach because one of the producers and content creators. Yeah, we played for him in under 17.
Exactly.
In Sasselberg back in the day.
And he's still involved in school rugby, but he's doing a lot of work at Gcobani
and a super rugby club.
Yes. Plus, he's doing a lot of all-round school work. They'll put so kudos to him and all the people who outside of the existing ecosystem are still putting work in to ensure that there are players who may not get an opportunity are still getting a chance. But you know what is needed here. It's I know that the basic education minister Sfiyo Kwahube and Sports Minister Katie McKenzie did sign an MOU, I think at the start of the GNU period, where they pledged to work together to give school sports a fighting chance. There needs to be a very big change in mentality in that you need black teachers, black principals at these schools to understand that as much as you want academics to work, you need school sports to work, because without school sports, kids are academic machines. But in being academic machines, they do not have an outlet to release all the testosterone or the progesterone and all of that, you see. And that's why now we've seen an increase in social ills, kids drinking young, because
I was sitting back. I'm sorry to jump in here, Katie. I was sitting back and I was talking to my niece and I was saying, actually, what happens to the other schools when everyone is coming to festivals and all of that? They're sitting back in the township and everyone is having a crack and everything is happening. It's opening up all types of different things because parents are at work, we're on holidays, you got so much extra time to get into trouble, and there's nothing that is constructively put together, either a festival or even just a cultural festival where you can go and do your arts and culture and all of that.
So, as a kid, I know that I played lower team rugby, but I didn't always understand the need for, let's say, the C teams to be playing against your Basevilles. Yeah. But in time, I've realized that that's how you keep kids interested in the sport, by organizing games. And that diminishing of organized sports in townships is a leading cause of the spike in drug and alcohol use amongst teenagers, because they don't have a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday outlet from a training to build habits outside of what they do academically. And then on the Saturday they play.
Something that's going to say, you know what, I can't go out tonight because tomorrow I've got somewhere to have to be and be accountable.
And if you remember, especially in your era, where practices would be Monday, Tuesday at township schools, they play on Wednesday.
Yes.
And Thursday, Friday, it's practices, but they then go play for the clubs on Saturday.
Yeah.
So remember that with their clubs, they would play with their peers and some of their parents.
Yes.
So what that dearth of school sports has done in the township, it has killed club rugby, it has killed club sports. Because now you also get players who are over the age of 19 or 20 who are unable to play school sports. But with township schools, the rules are always fast and loose. You always see
what do you call it? Soccer age.
Yeah, well, no, you knew that, but you knew who was old. But you saw Tas Ban playing for the first team. But you also knew that on a Saturday he's going to be playing club rugby.
Starting.
So yes. So you also there was always a cycle to it that helped keep kids and parents, because remember that a lot of that also built an economy, because you knew on a Wednesday afternoon there are parents who are selling sweets or selling food, selling amaguinya, and then there's transportation involved, because there are people who come from other parts of a location to come and watch.
Someone has
So-
to provide that transport.
Yes,
yeah.
and what then that does, it then leads to the upkeep of the facilities, because if that facility is
consistently holding things.
yes holding things together, people will
Events.
say yes, people will take pride, because people will know that it generates income for them on big days. Therefore, you've got a responsibility to protect that particular venue. So, I mean, once you have that cycle going again, I don't know whether there's the wherewithal to get it back together again, because with the focus on matric pass rates, the Romeo that must die in the township is school rugby. And unfortunately, it's got a knock-on effect socially.
Sure.
It's got a knock-on effect from economic perspective. It's also got a knock-on effect from a opportunity perspective, because it's a staging ground for a lot of kids.
Yeah.
And with that staging ground for kids, there are those who will probably break that mold. Because if you have kids playing from under 9 level onwards, there are those who, with more game time, will get better and they will get picked up. And I mean, Lam
and it opens up the space for another kid to get involved.
exactly.
And get
There's
involved and
always
get
like
involved.
I mean,
It's not like as if they're taking them away,
and-
because you're opening up a space. As long there is programs and projects that are there held at the same standard.
yeah. I mean, Grace fullback, Lam Geddes,
Oh,
was part of the Hamilton's program from Ekailicha, picked up by Grace, a 10-year-old. He's been at great college. But you now look at him leaving is not necessarily a bad thing for the club, because the club will realize that, hey, if we can find Olamlam Geddes, how many of these kids you can find? And look, I mean, a lot of them, you'd find that there are more talented players than him.
Yeah.
But whether they have the right background, the right discipline. And remember that one of the things
mental
that's
aptitude is different.
exactly. And one of the things that sports creates a family.
Yeah.
Because if you know that you've got as teammates, if you know that you've got a talented but wayward individual, and you know their background, you know their problems, you'll always find someone who'll be in a position to help and to make this person better, because you can see where their ceiling is. Your ceiling and their ceiling are two different places.
Sure.
And all they just need is the right person in the right place and seeing the right things in his ear. So what that disappeared layer of black school rugby has done, it's creating a bottleneck where a lot of talented players now want to get into your full model C schools. And them getting there, they will obviously now move off and go, the ones who are extremely talented will go to the better schools.
Yeah, they'll
But
move on.
what it then does, because you don't have that constant layer of players coming through, a school will then feel the absence of a particular player. But when you've got a system, and remember that township rugby can exist, rural rugby can exist as a separate ecosystem where the
As its
schools
own niche.
because they've got schools, they've got numbers. What thing they have schools and they have numbers.
Yeah.
Because those schools pack in at least 1,400 kids.
Yeah.
From those 1,400 kids, boys and girls, you can't tell me you can't find 250 kids who are going to play rugby, and that's all you need.
That's all.
You don't need like your.
You don't need everyone.
Yes,
there.
you don't want to have an AFI scale program where you've got 13 senior teams and you've got 10, 11 teams in every age group in the township, because also kids have different challenges.
Yeah.
That you need to understand. But if you've got 314 teams, 315 teams, 316 teams, and 4 senior teams, you effectively
actually got a proper program.
Yeah, you've actually removed minimum 200 kids
Out of
from a lot of problems and get them to play rugby. And the facilities are there.
Yeah.
And the more kids play, the more those facilities will be looked after.
And the more people will do the upkeep.
Exactly.
And we all care because it helps my kid to
Yes.
be in a space where we can see them in a better light.
Yes.
Katie, my friend, I know we can go
Yeah.
on about this. There's another one that we will do soon. Just a review of how things go and how festivals and how school sports and how the agents and the recruitment and how much forces now are these kids being like at it's like a livestock, like my dad used to take me to go.
There's
buy
showroom
sheep.
floor. It's a fest. I mean, Northside, Greyfest, Oakdale Festival, which
Yeah.
hosted a lot of the macro Afrikaans speaking and some of the English speaking macro schools.
Yeah.
I mean, Riversdale. There's the was one Donny Rousseau week in Bombela. It's a showroom floor. And I think with agents now, they're spoiled for choice. The universities are spoiled for choice. And I think if you look at the spread of the players who are playing Varsity Cup rugby,
become vast now.
Varsity Shield, you realize that there's some players who you would not have seen play regularly at the first team level, but they're late bloomers. And they are starting to show up as players. I mean, like, there was other Christian Van Heeren Smith and Marty's. I'd never heard of him. I've heard Paul Ross. I'd never heard of him as a player, but he's now featuring quite regularly for Marty's. I mean, I think one of Shimla's best players, Liam Schamberg, the loose forward. I mean, he played outside centre for Pretoria Boys High. And so you get a lot of these players who regular players, yes.
Yeah.
But because bodies develop differently, ceilings are reached at different stages.
Yeah.
So I think with it's an imperfect science, unfortunately, because a player at 18 and a player at 22 are different stages, and in that period, a lot can happen to a player mentally, on the field, off the field, at home. So there could be a lot of life changing. Yeah. So
and this is life.
Yeah, life happens. I mean, it happens to everyone. So it's a very difficult ground because you have to hedge your bets on a player, and then you hope and pray that player comes off with the necessary. You remember that player is the necessary goods, but your next hope is that particular player then comes off.
My guy, you always have me like on the tentacles, and I'm always sort of stuck in and so enthused about how much there is and how much potential there is possibly, and things that could still happen, and opportunities.
One of the things I'll say, and in short, is that as South African rugby, I'll include myself, because as a reporter, I am part of the ecosystem. So are you, as a former player and an analyst and a coach. We are scratching at the surface, where if there would be a hearts and minds approach, it would require a whole lot of transformation, and that is a term that a lot of people don't like.
Yeah.
But it would require a transformative hearts and minds approach that would, and if we would be able to unlock not even 80%, 50% of the available playing resources from a rugby and a coaching perspective in this country, we would pretty much be untouchable. I mean, France can go and raid the Pacific Islands for what they want. They'd have all the money in the world.
We even in touch on things.
Yeah, they'd have all the money in the world. They would still look and just realize that they can't touch us. I mean, South Africa's Super Rugby is your URC franchises are functional at best, but you realize that they are functional without not always having to put in the effort, when you realize the amount of talent that is churned through each and every year. I mean, if you look at the recruitment lists from the under-19s that come into the provinces, you realize that that's just those who've been seen. What about those who've slipped the
There's
thousands?
Ones who slip through the net. There's ones that are not even been seen by anyone else.
Yes.
You only need those sort of connections, maybe with like managers, coaches, agents.
Which is in closing from my side, why it's very important for the smaller unions to know their place, where they know that as provinces,
we are feeders.
Ours is to develop players, and in developing players, they move. And when those players move,
the next ones
come in. I think,
and that is a sustainable business, instead of trying to hold back all the talent.
Yes,
because there could be a fee that could be used to actually reimburse you.
Exactly,
and then all of a sudden that becomes a benefit to the next kid.
Yes.
It's almost like paying it forth.
Yes, it's exactly it, and it used to be in place.
Katie, let's hold it down for now.
Yeah.
It's been another eye opener. We're just starting to see how far we can go, and there's so many things that is happening in rugby that can really change the opportunities within the sort of called micro spaces where now they can be part of enlarging and getting things bigger. This is Keeping It Rugby with Gcobani Bobo, and this is Khanyiso Tshwaku.